Each and every time I stand up in front of a group of people like this, somewhere in the world, to share for a few minutes about some things in this life I believe to be important. Every time I do this, I am always reminded of that time in my life when this was not possible. It was 30 years ago. I woke up one morning, I instantly realized I had lost the remainder of my sight, and I knew I would live the rest of my life as a blind person. And the thoughts and the doubts and the fears that came over me that morning, those decades ago, would be impossible to describe to you. I was 29 years old, I had never met a blind person, and I didn't have a clue what I was going to do with the rest of my life. In fact, the only plan I could come up with that day involved moving into this little 9 by 12 foot room in the back of my house. And in my little room there, I gathered my radio, my telephone, and my tape recorder. And that was my whole world 30 years ago. The thought of traveling millions of miles and speaking to millions of people in arena events, or the thought of running a television network with over 1,000 stations, or the thought of writing 50 books and having 8 of them now made into movies, or the thought of being here with you guys would have seemed as foreign to me as going to the moon. I couldn't imagine it. So I sat in my little 9 by 12 foot self-imposed prison day after day after day, and I'm quite certain I would still be there this afternoon except for one thing, and that is the fact that I literally ached for people like you to come talk to. So I want you to know what a thrill it is for me to be a part of the important work you guys are doing. And I am excited that we have a group in our state that's dedicated to ethics. You know, it's easy to find groups dedicated to profits or dedicated to enriching themselves, but it's hard to find a group dedicated to ethics. And whether you want to enrich yourself or be ethical, it's pretty much the same thing if you look at it hard enough and long enough. But it is a privilege to be with you. When you live your life like I do as a blind person, and some of the most talented and dedicated people in our field of movies, television, publishing, some of the best people are willing to dedicate their lives, or in my case, they dedicate their eyes, to making it possible for you to do what you do. You take every opportunity, including ones like this, to simply say thank you. Generally, as I travel around the world, I have 1 or 2 of my staff people that go with me. Today, I am fortunate, the boss is here today. Crystal and I have been married 40 years, and I'm very grateful she had some time, and we got to drive over together from Tulsa and just spend the day together, and I really appreciate that. And I met Crystal 40 years ago. We were in college, and we've been married now 40 years, on our way to forever together. But I met her, and I had just lost my sight. I had a plan when I was a young man. I was going to be an All-American football player and then go into the NFL and make my living playing football on Sundays. And the scouts and coaches that monitor those sorts of things assured me I had the size and speed to do that. So I thought my life was pretty well set. And then during a routine physical to go play another season of football, you always have to get this in-depth physical before you go play big-time football. They want to make sure that you're healthy before they take you out and try to kill you. It's very important to them. Well, this one year, the physical was taking a lot longer than I thought it should. And eventually this doctor shined his light in my eye, and eventually another doctor came in, and they took me down a long hall, and they said, Jim, we're not sure why, we're not sure when, but you're going to be totally blind, and there's nothing we can do about it, and your whole world just stops. I instantly realized I was not going to go into the NFL and make my living playing football on Sundays. I did a little research then. I actually did, and at that time and to this very day, there has never been a blind guy in the NFL. Now, I actually called Jerry Jones after that game last year with the Washington football team, and I said, Jerry, what is going on? Are we signing up blind people now? What are we doing here? And he said, no, Jim, those guys, they have some problems. It's not being blind. It's unemployment, the problem they're going to be having, Jim. And so anyway, I then went to Oral Roberts University in Tulsa, and And I finally figured out that when you're not playing football, schools actually want you to study something. It's really shocking to me. And at that time, they didn't have audio books, nobody prepared for me, so they got different students to read my textbooks to me. And Crystal was one of those people. That's how we met. Well, as soon as I met her, I went and told the department chair, we're really not going to need any of these other people here. I'm either going to get through this with her or I'm not going to make it at all. And it was that way in school, and it's been that way in life. And it turns out Crystal graduated first in our class at Oral Roberts University, and I graduated second. And as Travis mentioned in the introduction, I was an Olympic weightlifting champion. I'm a competitive guy. And if you graduated second in your class, that's not bad, guys, unless you live with number one. It's kind of brutal. But over the last few years, I've kind of developed a theory on that. See, I'm not sure she read me that whole book. I have no direct evidence to support that, but it makes me feel better. Well, when I think of ethics, I realize I can have thousands of policies and rules or a couple of principles. And when I started my career in business, those many years ago, I thought life was about going from poverty, which we had achieved. I thought it was about going from poverty to prosperity. That's all you got to do. You go from poor to rich. And only when I achieved prosperity did I realize, no, you're just getting started. Life is about going from poverty to prosperity to purpose. And really, you can skip the prosperity. Life's about finding purpose. And when I wrote The Ultimate Gift, the book and the movie, I realized that life is about finding our gift, and we achieve meaning and significance when we give it away. Find out whatever it is you got and give it away. And I know that if I will come to work every day, and I first focus on the 13 million blind and visually impaired people we serve, the millions of people that read my books or columns, the people I get to speak to in arena events, if I will focus on those people first, secondly, I focus on my team, the people that make this happen, they deliver what I promise. If I'll take care of my audience and my customers first, my employees and my colleagues second, I don't even have to get to me. And the key to being ethical in any situation is to remember it ain't about you. And if you stay focused on other people, ethics take care of themselves. And Crystal and I have been learning that in our journey of generosity. And it all started in the spring in a chapel service at Oral Roberts University 40 years ago. And I was sitting there in this huge building with 4,000 other students. And our speaker that day was a guy who had a nonprofit organization, and he dug water wells for people in sub-Saharan Africa so they would have clean drinking water. And I don't remember much about his talk, but at the end of his message, the president of the university got up and said, I think we should take up a collection to help this man with his work. I thought that was a great idea, except I only had $17 to my name. And it was all in my pocket. I had a 10, a 5, and 2 ones. That was all I had, and there wasn't much coming. And so as the basket approached me, I reached in my pocket and I grabbed a $1 bill. And just as the basket is coming to me, the president of the university gets up and says, "Stop." He said, "Somebody needs to hear this. Either give your best and expect the best, or keep your money because you'll need it." One of the hardest things I ever did in my life, I put my $1 bill in there and I got out a $10 bill. And I put it in that basket, and I was a little tense because I had a date that night with Miss Crystal, and we weren't exactly a couple yet. Well, I was already a little worried about my $17 date was going to be a little thin, if you know what I mean. $7 date, this is out of the question. So when I met up with her after chapel, she said, "What'd you think?" And I said, "Well, I got good news, I got bad news. The good news is I helped that man with his water wells. The bad news is we're getting ready to have us a $7 date. And she was very gracious then, as she is today, and she said, why don't we just eat in the dining room and then go for a walk? I thought, okay, I can probably afford that. Well, we ended up in an empty lecture hall in the Graduate Center, and she asked me a question that changed my life. She said, what do you think we're going to do when we get out of college? Well, there'd never been any real we in any of our conversations up to that point, so I took this as a very positive omen. Well, I could still see a little bit then, so I grabbed the marker and jumped up on the marker board and I started writing. I said, well, I'm going to start a company, then I'm going to become a millionaire, and then I'm going to write a book, and I'm going to do all these things. I wrote them down. And then the last thing I wrote was someday I'm going to find something I care about as much as that guy cared about those water wells, and I'm going to write a check for $1 million and give it away, which is bold for a blind man with $7 in his pocket. Well, just like I'd written it in a movie script, every one of those things came together one by one by one. But I'd never found my thing. You know, we've done a lot of projects. The administrative building at ORU is called the Stovall Administrative Center. We've sent 500 kids to college through our scholarships. We've helped people in Haiti and people around the world with different things. But I never found my thing. Until 4 years ago this spring, I was in a board meeting at the university. And the president of the university now, he said, guys, I'd like you to break up into groups and just discuss what do you think our university should be doing in the year 2030? And people threw out a lot of ideas, but one of them, somebody said we should have a school of entrepreneurship where young people can come from around the world and learn how to run businesses and get a degree and go home and start businesses and create jobs and opportunities in their countries. Because right now we have 126 nations represented on campus today as we speak. Well, that idea just would not leave me alone that summer. So in the fall, I called the president of the university. I said, can you come over to the house? I want to talk to you about something. And I said, I'm going to tell you my vision for the Stovall Center of Entrepreneurship. And if you like it, I'll give you $1 million today. And he listened to it and he said, I'm excited about it. I have to go talk to the trustees, but I'll get back with you in a week or two. Well, he was good as his word. In a week or two, he was back. And he said, Jim, they liked it. In fact, they loved it. In fact, they loved it so much, Jim, they added some ideas to them, and it's going to cost $2 million. That is the sign of a great educational administrator. Ups your vision for the gift. Well, I agreed. I'll give you the $1 million I promised. I'll give you half of the other. And I'm very proud to say that the Green family here in Oklahoma City became my partner in the Stovall Center for Entrepreneurship. And it probably means more than the money to have one of the great entrepreneurial families in American history, really, get involved with our project. And it's been just a great ride. And we're only 3 years into it, and this spring we'll be graduating our first 2 students. We really didn't plan to graduate any till next year, but these kids kind of slipped in and studied hard in the summers, and they're going to graduate early, so we're actually going to graduate 2. But when you see these kids from around the world and what they're doing, it's just amazing to me. And, you know, ethics is about getting the spotlight off of you and putting it on other people. And when your motives are right, your decisions are always right. And I remember Crystal and I were standing backstage, and we were getting ready to go out there in that same chapel where I'd been 40 years earlier and given $10. And we were going to give them one of those big checks, you know, and that symbolizes a $1 million gift. And just before we went out on stage, backstage, they said, Jim, we want to introduce you to Dr. Kevin Schneider. He's going to be the executive director of the Stovall Center for Entrepreneurship. Well, he was an amazing academic. I had read his material, and I was really excited about it. So it was nice to meet him. And he said, Jim, you changed my life. And I said, well, Kevin, I didn't pick you. They picked you. I think they made a good choice, but I didn't have anything to do with it. He said, no, you don't understand. 20 years ago, when I was an undergrad student, I ran out of money. I was right on the edge of losing my education. And I went to my mailbox one day and opened it up, and I had one envelope, and it was a letter from you, and you gave me a scholarship. You don't even know that. And 20 years later, now I am the director of the Stovall Center for Entrepreneurship. You know, and there are times in life we go through it and it just seems so chaotic and disjointed and disorganized. And then every once in a while you kind of break through the clouds and you're on this plateau and you look back where you've been and you realize there's no other way we would have gotten here except that. You know, and so this thing that was chaos turns into this almost divine order, and you see this whole creative process happening. Well, I'm so excited about what the kids have done. We're doing our third launch competition right now. It's like Shark Tank, and the kids come in and they start real businesses. I told them this is not a monopoly game here, guys. 3 of the 5 largest businesses on this planet started in somebody's dorm room, so why not yours? And the kids over the last few years have started amazing businesses. I'll never forget, there was a marketing student that hooked up with an engineering student, and one of them had just been to Africa on a mission trip, and when they got back, COVID was devastating over there, and they said in some of those villages they don't even have ventilators to keep people alive, and if they do have them, the electricity is so hit and miss that they can't keep them going. So they actually saw family members standing next to their uncle, their father, whoever it was, who's on a ventilator, and when the power would go out, the family members would take turns giving them mouth-to-mouth resuscitation and keep them alive. And these students were so moved by that, they came home and invented a ventilator that's been approved by the World Health Organization. They've already sold a number of them. And it runs on batteries, it runs on electricity, and it runs on solar power. And they created this. And you know, when I see these kids coming up with these amazing, amazing ideas, we had a young lady from Guatemala. She grew up in a fishing village, and the workers go out every day in their boats and work hard and catch, but there was only one guy on the dock that they could sell their catch to, and he kind of controlled the market. It was really unfair, and he took advantage of them. And she went out and made a deal with Walmart and made a deal with package delivery people for people that wanted to order direct. And she has created a brand new market for, and it's just changed the culture in our whole village in Guatemala. So it is so much fun to see what these people do. And when you have a vision that's bigger than yourself and it's not about yourself, ethics take care of themselves. And Crystal and I had so much fun that year giving away $1 million. And at the end of each year, we meet with our financial guy. And we had more money than we started out with, so we said, why don't we do it again? And I do a lot of consulting with a lot of companies around the world, and one of them is a debt consolidator in New York. And you know, they package and buy and sell debt that people are going to collect. And I asked them after one meeting, I said, could I buy, I want to give you $1 million. I want to buy $1 million of people's debt, medical debt. And they said, Jim, you're our consultant. You're not going to get in business again, in competition, are you? I said, no, I just want to buy it. And he said, okay. And I gave him $1 million. And he said, what do you want me to do with it? I said, I want you to write those families, 1,184 families, write them and tell them their debt is forgiven. It's just gone. And I said, I'd like to get the phone numbers for about a dozen. I don't want to call 1,100 families, but I'd like to call a few. And then you have one of those moments that you realize you're in the right place, the right time, doing the right thing. And the first number I called was a guy in Valdosta, Georgia, an uneducated truck driver. And I called him and said, sir, you probably got a letter recently saying that your medical debt had been forgiven. He said, we sure did. I said, well, I'm the guy that sent you the letter. I just want you to know we're thinking about you. We're looking forward to better days ahead for you and your family. He was talking to me and thanking me. I could hear on his end of the line, somebody walked in to the room. And he said, I'm on the phone with the guy that paid for April's eyes. And he came back on and he said, I'm sorry. And I said, no, what was that? And he said, well, my wife came into the room. I told her that I was talking to you. And I said, no, tell me about April's eyes. He said, April's our little girl. And she was losing her eyesight and she needed a series of 3 operations. Our insurance paid for the first one and paid for part of the second one, but it maxed it out and they wouldn't do the third one until we paid for the second one. And I was working 2 jobs. We sold everything we had. We were running out of time. And then I got your letter. And now they've done the third one on my little girl. And he said, Mr. Stovall, you have no idea what it means to save someone's eyesight. I said, well, I got a clue. And so as you move forward in your life, if you'll focus on the fact it ain't about you, and you'll focus on principles instead of policies, ethics are a wonderful thing, and it just becomes a normal part of your life. They take care of themselves. Now, I promised I would leave some time and answer some questions. Now, generally, I only have 2 rules when I take questions. Number 1, don't ask anything I don't know the answer to. That's very important. We have a rule at the Narrative Television Network that says Jim should never look stupid. Now, we don't always achieve that, I must say, but we try mightily. And the second thing, very critical, don't raise your hand. Because see, if you raise your hand, especially you folks online, 2 things are going to happen. They're both really bad. Number 1, you're going to feel really stupid. And number 2, I am not going to call on you. There was a woman I just spoke at the Wealth Conference in Atlanta. I think there's still a woman in the amphitheater with her hand raised, thinking I'm going to call on her. So with that, I believe you've captured some questions, and I would love to spend some time we have left answering those and talking about what you want to talk about. So who has the questions? He was asking about different cultures and how they view ethics in different corporate cultures and things like that. And, you know, it's interesting because there are different cultures. My first business, and I still do a lot of work in the financial services industry. I'm a member of New York Stock Exchange, and we do a lot of work with high net worth people. And in that business, they've gone through this big transition. Like, are you a fiduciary? Are you responsible? Are you responsible for your advice or the results or whatever? And, you know, everybody wants to know, you know, what am I liable for? And, you know, once again, if you'll focus on your client and treat them the way you'd want to be treated, and then focus on your employees and make sure you're creating an opportunity that will help each of them reach their goal, it takes care of itself. But there are a lot of industries, it's just, you know, they go into it, what's the least I can do and what can I get away with? And it's very, very frustrating. And, you know, I'm trying to close a movie deal right now. And I got to tell you, a lot of the fiction and the best actors aren't necessarily on the screen. They're the lawyers you have to deal with. And, you know, I've done movies with friends where we shook hands and we made a movie. And I did a movie based on my book called The Lamp. And I hired Academy Award winner Louis Gossett Jr. to come to Tulsa, Oklahoma and shoot this movie with me. He was amazing. And because of the budget of the film, I could only afford him for 5 days. So I figured out all his scenes and we shot those all over those 5 days. And he was looking at some of those and he said, Jim, I'm not happy with that. And that last deal we shot, and I said, well, Lou, I mean, your contract's over today. I don't have the time to reshoot it. And he said, you know, because it's my movie and that's our contract. He said, but it's my career and my name. He said, how about first thing in the morning? I said, yeah, let's do that. And those scenes are amazing in that movie. He was just truly amazing. And, you know, the people I see that succeed aren't always the best, the brightest, the smartest, but they are the people that are reliable, dependable, and trustworthy. And, you know, in our culture, we look too much short term. You know, the guys on Wall Street, everything comes down to what were your numbers next quarter? What are you going to look at? And, if all you care about is what are your short-term numbers, I mean, lay everybody off, don't take care of your deferred maintenance, and cancel all your supplies. You'll look great for a quarter before you go off the cliff. You'll look great. But, really, when you take yourself out of the loop and say, what would I like to be treated like, and who would I like to deal with? If you'll be that person, you'll find it. When I talk to the young people at the university regularly, a lot of them are in their dating phase, and they're all out looking for the right person. I said, I'll tell you the absolute secret to finding the right person. Quit focusing on who you find and just be the right person for somebody, and they'll show up. It always takes care of itself. So be because in this life we think about what we have, and then we think about what we do, and finally, if we have any time left over, we think about who we are, who we're being. Well, we're not humans having or humans doing. We are human beings, and if you will be the person that will do the thing, you'll have everything you want. But if you worry about what you want to have and how you're going to get it and where are the shortcuts, you'll never get it. It just won't work. Abraham Lincoln said if integrity had not been invented as the right thing to do, it should have been invented as the quickest way to succeed. And I really believe that to be the case. Who has another question for us?
We have one from online. How have you handled a situation where someone you're dealing with in business isn't so ethical? If you don't mind repeating it again.
Yeah, have I dealt with people in business that aren't so ethical? Yeah, I really have, and it's a lot of extra work. I'm very pleased after 40 years in businesses, and we work over 6 or 7 different industries. I've never sued anybody, I've never been sued, and I've never done business with anybody I couldn't go back and do business with again. But, there are people, it's just too much work to do business with them. If I have to worry about my competition and worry about my quality control and worry about all my stuff, and I also have to worry about what's my partner doing to me, it's just, life's too short to do that. And I wrote a column last week that'll come out sometime next month. It's called Lessons from a Lawyer. And when I was a very young man, just out of college, 20-something, I was starting my company, and I knew I needed a lawyer, and I looked around in our part of the world down in Tulsa, and I found one of the best attorneys there was, and I don't know how I did. I got a meeting with him, and he was willing to take some time with me, and I said, well, first thing you need to know is I don't have much of a business yet, and so I'm not going to be your best client. He said, son, we figured out a long time ago in this firm that big clients start out as little clients. And okay, and I said, what's your record in the courtroom? How good are you? He said, I'm very good, but he said, you're asking the wrong question, son. He said, it's not my job to win for you in the courtroom, it's my job to keep you out of the courtroom. And I said, what's your advice on how we do that? He said, go into every transaction, every business deal, every conversation, assuming the truth will ultimately be known. And if you go into everything assuming the whole truth will ultimately be known by everybody, you can't help but be ethical. Another question.
Jim, I've got a question. In regard to how it relates to religion, have you found that ethics inform religion, or religion informs ethics, or they're completely separate and there's no correlation at all?
Well, how does religion and ethics meld together, and is one lead the other, or is the question? Yes, I am a person of faith. You don't have to read too many of my books or movies to figure that out. But I do business with a lot of people. One of my best friends is a billionaire, mega wealthy guy, investor, who lives on top of a skyscraper. He has a penthouse in Toronto, Ontario, and he and I talk almost every week. And he is an atheist. And, he believes in the scientific method, and if you can't prove it, repeat it, and demonstrate it, it doesn't exist. And he said, so how do you explain God? I said, that's why we call it faith. but he is very ethical. He has his own standards. So I have seen people from every faith walk and no faith walk who are ethical. And I have to tell you, I've seen a lot of people of faith who, in business, they leave a lot of dead bodies behind them of people they've hurt. And I wish they'd quit telling people they are people of faith. Don't tell me, just show me. Just show me, and then we'll know. It will be great. But so I can't separate the two. We, because of a lot of authors like me, I guess, have decided to compartmentalize our lives. And how's my fitness, my finance, how's my family life, my faith life, where am I? Well, those are great as tools to examine how we're doing or what we're doing. But in the final analysis, you can't separate them. I mean, in all of the scriptures, it's, what gaineth anyone if they have the whole world and lose their soul, lose their ethics, lose who they are, lose their way, whatever it may be. And so I can't separate the two. I don't care how much money you have. If you ruin your kids or your spouse doesn't respect you, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. So, we can't really separate those things. But so I really can't take my faith out of my ethics, out of my business. And I certainly try to respect everyone else's faith. I'm amazed at how close we are to things. I was just reading a book about Islam, and this Dome of the Rock. I never really knew what it was. Well, this is a rock. People think it's a meteor, probably, that came down that was a sign to Abraham. Well, it's in the Christian Bible. It's in the Jewish Talmud. It's in the Muslim Quran, and it's amazing how we're all together through quite a bit of our faith walk, and we have a whole lot more in common than we have that separates us. But great question. Who has another question for us?
I have another one. Oh, please go ahead, Travis.
You were a National Olympic weightlifter. Tell us about that, and especially since the Olympics are going on now.
That was an interesting point in my life. He wanted to know how I became an Olympic weightlifting champion. And I never really intended to do that. I thought I was going to be a pro football player. And then, as I told you earlier, I was diagnosed with this condition that would cause me to lose my sight. And I got up one morning in my late teens. I was approaching 20. And I had a serious conversation with God. Now, I'd grown up in the church. I would say we were religious. Religion's great until you have a crisis. Then you have to go from religion to relationship. And a lot of people have traded in their relationship for religion. That would be like, instead of living with your spouse, once a week you go to a place and hear a guy talk about it. And that just doesn't work so well for me. But I had grown up in a religious atmosphere, but all of a sudden I'm facing a crisis. So I just said, God, if you are real. Well, first of all, I told him what I thought about all this, and I wasn't real thrilled about the whole deal, to be honest about it. And I figure if you're God, you already know what I'm thinking, so I may as well tell you, and if you're not, it really doesn't matter anyway. But I said, God, if you're real, I need to know that there's a place for a blind guy and there's something else I can do in this life. And I need to know there's a place for a blind guy, and I need to know like today. I put God on a time schedule, if you can imagine, you're on the clock now, God. Well, that fall, as happens every fall in Tulsa, my hometown, the state fair comes to town. And I'd always been playing football, so I'd never gone since I'd been a little tiny kid. So I thought, well, I can go to the fair, and I can still see well enough to get around. I'll do that. Well, I got there, and in the big exhibition building, they had a demonstration from the previous Olympic teams. And to be real honest, I went over to watch the gymnasts, the girls over there flying around doing stuff, and I thought that's kind of interesting. Well, about the time I get there, they bring out the weightlifters. And I watched those guys, and I said, now that's something a guy could do even if he was going totally blind. And 3 years later, I was the national champion. I got to finish my career on the Olympic team. And then I walked on down the midway to the pavilion, the big arena there, and they had a giant sign that said free concert. Well, I had no idea who was playing, but free really fit my budget. So I walked in this huge arena. There was nobody there. So I went all the way down, sat on the front row. And I thought about it a little, and I reminded God, you're now within 5 hours of your deadline, God. I need to know there's a place for me, and a blind guy can do something in this life. And I was thinking about those weightlifters, and I was thinking about I'm never going to play football again, and thinking about what else I could do. And I was so intent on my thoughts and my reverie there that the arena filled up around me. I really didn't pay attention to it. In fact, the first thing I really paid attention to was a voice I will never forget that said, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the Tulsa State Fair, the one, the only, the legend, Ray Charles." And they brought Ray out, and he was about 8 feet away from me. And Ray was some kind of magic. And I said, okay, God, I get it. Blind guy can do something. I wasn't sure what it was going to be for me, and I figured, Ray's kind of got this music thing covered. I better go do something else. And it wasn't, 10 years later, I had my business, Narrative Television. We won an Emmy Award. We're growing. Everything's great. My first books are out. And I am speaking to 18,000 international business people at Madison Square Garden. And when I was done, the promoter hugged me. He said, "Man, that's exactly what we needed. That was awesome." He said, "I got another group coming in next weekend. Can you do that one too?" Well, we have a rule in my speaking business. As long as you want to pay, we will play. And I said, "So yeah, I'd be proud to do it again if you want to do it again." And he said, "Well, do you want to go back to Oklahoma or do you want to stay here in New York?" I said, "Well, I have some television business I need to do, so I'll stay here." He said, "Well, I have another act in town if you want to go see." And I was trying to think of a polite way to tell this man that's paying me more money than anybody should get for doing something they love doing. I was trying to think, how do I tell him I'm not comfortable out in public and, all the stuff, and I don't mind being on stage, but being in a big crowd. But just to be polite, I said, "Who do you got?" He said, "Opening Tuesday night, Carnegie Hall, Ray Charles." I said, "Yeah, I'll go to that." I said, "You got anything on the front row?" He said, "I got it." So there I am 10 years later, I'm on the front row, Ray's doing his thing. Afterwards, they took me backstage and they said, "Just a minute, he's got to sign a few more autographs and then you two can talk." Well, I'd been blind 10 years by then almost, and I didn't know blind people could write. I really didn't. So I said, "Well, how does he write?" And Ray heard it and said, "Well, who said that?" I said, "Well, my name's Jim Stovall, and I'm blind too, and I didn't know blind people could write." He said, "Son, if anybody in your life ever thinks enough of you to want your autograph, the least you can do is learn how to write your name." Kind of ticked me off, actually. I said, well, you're going to have to show me. And he said, "Sit yourself down here." So he got out a piece of paper and traced out, showed me how he signed Jim Stovall and showed me how to write Ray Charles. And I could do it. It was another 10 years before I learned how to write anything other than Jim Stovall and Ray Charles. That's all I knew how to write, is Jim Stovall and Ray Charles. And then it was just a few months before we lost him. He did one of his last 3 concerts in Tulsa with our Philharmonic, and I went over to see him, went backstage. I said, "Raymond, how we doing?" And he and I both knew he didn't have long. And he says, "You think when we get to heaven we'll be able to see you?" I said, "I'm planning on it." He said, "What do you think one of them angels looks like?" And I said, "Well, they're supposed to be people that show up when we need them and help us out with what we need." And I said, "So to me, an angel's going to look a lot like Ray Charles, I think." And but that's how I became a weightlifter. I qualified for the 1980 Olympics. That was the one, if you remember, and you got a little gray hair, Jimmy Carter, because the Russians had invaded Afghanistan, we didn't go to those games. And so I won the national championship and got my gold medal, and then in '84 Olympics was in Los Angeles. And because we didn't go to their Olympics in Russia, the Russians didn't come to our Olympics here. So in my sport, if the Russians aren't coming, there's not much of that's who you want to beat. I did get to do a couple tours with the Russian weightlifters. That was fascinating during the Cold War, because we all thought they hated us. And they thought we hated them, and you know, it was just a fascinating experience. And all they knew of Americans, they had seen American movies. So they thought all American women looks like those women in the movies. And I said, some better and some not so much better, you know, and we had a good time. But it was interesting when you actually could sit down with other guys and just talk. You know, they don't hate us, we don't hate them. And you know, I did point out to the great Russian weightlifter, Vasily Alexiev, I said, one big difference between yours and ours, though, is you got these guys over here in the overcoats that making sure you stay where you're supposed to stay and make sure you go back home. And they didn't send anybody to make sure I don't go to Russia. And they're just betting on my intelligence that I don't want to go live like that. And but I was very, you know, it was an interesting lesson for me because they were amazed with America and all the things we have and how great it was, but they still loved their country and they wanted to go back home and they loved it. So, but that's how I became a weightlifter. Funny thing happened on the way to the fair, you know. So, who has another question for us?
We have another one from online. Has being blind made you see things that others probably miss?
Has being blind made me see things that other things miss? Well, I can guarantee I miss things that other people see. I had a close encounter with the cheesecake earlier there at the table, and very exciting. But yes, I see things other people don't. And, you know, and when you're blind, you pay really close attention to things around you. So I do. I spoke one time at a criminologist convention, and there was a whole auditorium full of investigators, police department, homicide guys, and everything else. And they'd done an exercise just before I got there, like, okay, observe the room, now write down what you see. What do you notice? What do you remember? And, you know, so I was backstage, and the promoter of the event says, could you do that? Could you write anything down? I said, sure. There are 4 ceiling fans out there, and the back right one squeaks, and there's an alley that runs along the side of the auditorium, and it's one way from back to front. And the doors in the back, the ones on the far left, squeak really bad. And I said, that's what I know. He said, wow, out of all these other things guys wrote down, you know stuff nobody else knew. And that actually started a time where I actually did a little work with the Tulsa Police Department. They would take me out to a crime scene to see what do I know that other people don't. So yeah, there are things you know and you're aware of that other people aren't. And there's things you're not aware of that I'm kind of glad. I had an aspiring writer come to see me, and she's a poet. I've written one book of poetry and edited a couple others, and she came to see me, an amazing talent. And I said, I'd love to help you, introduce you to my publisher and everything. And after she left, my marketing director comes in and she said, do you know she's got blue hair and a ring in her nose? And I said, no, but I'm kind of glad I didn't know that, you know? I'm glad I didn't know that. And so, you know, you become aware of things. And now I'm going to admit to something in Oklahoma ethics that you probably never had anybody do. But when I first started narrative television, I would go on any show, anywhere, at any time, they'd let me promote my network. Because whether blind people watch or listen or not, everybody who knows somebody that's blind and hears about our free service and how they can watch primetime movies and TV shows and everything, they're going to go tell these people. So I got invited to be on the Howard Stern show in New York. And all my people on my team said, Jim, this guy's a pervert. He's going to kill us, your image. And I said, no, he's not going to hurt us. And I go and I'm on Howard's show, and he was great. And, you know, we had fun. And at the end of the show, he said, is there anything good about being blind? And I thought about it, and I said, well, there's no cloudy days, there's no ugly women. And he said, wow, that is great. Because he said, I live in New York. We have smog every day, and we've got some ugly women. And I said, Howard, from what I've heard, you don't need to be criticizing anybody, Howard. But anyway, who has another question for us?
We have one more from online. What advice would you give someone wanting to start a business, and any mistakes or regrets that you have made that that might help someone else?
What advice I would give to someone who wants to start a business, and any regrets or things I've learned, mistakes to avoid. Advice I would give to anyone starting a business is pursue your passion, something you care about, something that matters to you. There are no good or bad businesses. Whatever business you can name, I'll show you people that are becoming very successful in it and other people who are not. And it's a matter, do you have passion in it? And I see a lot of people that get into a certain field because they heard it was good. Several years ago, I spoke for the American Bar Association, so thousands and thousands of lawyers. And I was signing books afterwards, and I found this trend that was very disturbing. I would ask, well, what do you enjoy most about being an attorney? Nothing, I hate it. Well, why did you become an attorney? I mean, well, I heard it was good, you make good money. Well, we have a rule in narrative television. Whenever we're talking about an idea, money doesn't come into it. Because I always tell my team, if all it is about money, let's sell cocaine to children. Because if all we're talking about is making money, that'll make a lot of money right there. And obviously, as absurd as that is, that tells us that doesn't work, guys. So I would tell people to pursue their passion. When I was with the New York Stock Exchange, I remember there was a guy, he's one of these guys, he could never get to work on time. He'd drag into his office and, have 9 cups of coffee. He'd wake up about mid-afternoon some days. And he just never could do it. And then he decided, you want to go fishing on Saturday? Okay, we'll go fishing on Saturday. I'll be in your driveway at 5:45. I said, in the morning? I mean, I didn't even know I knew you knew there was a 5:45 in the afternoon. I didn't know you were aware there was another one of those in the morning. He said, no, I'll be there. He's there, he's excited, he's passionate. We're standing in this frozen stream before the sun comes up. And I thought, where did this come from? Well, it comes from pursuing your passion. And if you don't pursue your passion, you'll be competing against people that do. And they will eat your lunch. So find something that matters to you and pursue it. And then mistakes to avoid, take care of all the legalities. The number one reason people go out of business, they don't pay their taxes because they don't set aside their money. That ain't your money. Now you can go over there to the Capitol and argue about how much of it they ought to have and you ought to have, but they're going to win that argument. And take care of business, take care of the details because it matters, and then pursue your passion. And we have time for one more in the room. Who gets the last question? This is your chance. You want to know anything about the movies? Anything about?
What's next for you?
What's next? When COVID happened, I realized that I'm not going to be traveling around doing arena events, so we've done a lot of online events and different things. And I decided, we're not going to be able to make any movies until this settles down a little bit. And because when you start a movie, you have to get a performance bond. An insurance company has to guarantee you'll finish this movie. And with COVID, they just weren't sure what that meant. So I said, okay, since I'm not going to be able to do arena events, I'm not going to be able to do the movies, I'll just write more. That's one of the things I do. And so I wrote 7 books in the last 18 months, the most prolific time of my life. They'll be coming out over the next few years. And now we're winding up to do 2 of our movies that we kind of put on hold. One's Will to Win. I have a series of books called Homecoming Historicals, and they all take place in modern day high schools, but the namesake of the school kind of gets involved with the kids in some cool ways. And the first one was called One Season of Hope, about Harry Truman, then Top of the Hill about Napoleon Hill, and then one called Will to Win about Will Rogers. And we're going to be shooting that over in Tulsa, hopefully late this year. The Will Rogers family and Jennifer Rogers, who runs their foundation and their museum, she's on board with us. It's the first project the family has endorsed since Will Rogers Follies went on to Broadway. So I'm really, really excited about that. So we're doing that, and then I have another movie I'm doing that kind of, it's a romantic comedy, but it also has a story in it about Compassion International and people that help children around the world. And so I'm hoping to once again, our motto is we want to do well by doing good, and that works for me. You know, we have our foundation. There's a lot of things we do for charity and nonprofits, but very few of them make as big a difference as Narrative Television, our for-profit company that's given us everything we wanted. You know, when you go to bed at night and you put your head on the pillow and you realize I made it possible for 13 million people to watch a movie with their family or watch TV, or hundreds of thousands of blind kids to go to school with their sighted peers, and that's a good day. Feel good about it. Guys, I want to thank you for who you are, first and foremost, people that care enough about ethics to show up here or to tune in online to be a part of what we're doing. You are the leaders. You are the people that are showing everyone else the way, because if you succeed without ethics, it doesn't really matter. And so you guys are the foundation of what we all should be and what we should be doing and who we are. So I want to thank you. And as always, I will leave you with this. Hold on to your dreams and stand tall, even when those around you would force you to crawl. Hold on to your dreams as a race you must run, even when reality whispers you'll never be done. And finally, my friends here in Oklahoma City, hold on to your dreams and wait for the miracle to come, because on that magical day, your dream and your reality will merge into one. Love you more than I can say, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.